นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening to you all. One of the experiences people have when they come to live in a Buddhist monastery is they have to follow rules, schedules, routines, do things in a certain way sometimes. Not everything, but monastery is a place of training and discipline. And this is one part of the practice of Buddhism. Whether you're at home or in a monastery, we need a certain amount of discipline, guidelines, rules. But in a monastery, the rules are more refined, and there's a lot of them, what we call the Vinaya, the monk's discipline or monastic discipline. And so when people come into the monastery, this often brings up issues for them, adjusting to the lifestyle. Obvious things like eating one meal a day, getting up early to meditate, maybe you're assigned chores that are useful to the community, learning things, learning to do different things, and some of those activities are maybe not to your liking, or sometimes they're to your liking, sometimes not, and so on. There's a certain amount of conformity in a monastery because it's a place of community, and a certain number of people live together. If everyone was doing exactly what they wanted all the time, then it would get quite confusing, and maybe there would be a clash of interests or whatever. So part of the training is, or part of the practice is giving up to the training, the routine, the rules, the monastic discipline. And that often brings up this friction and sense of self, what we call ditthi and mana, attachment to views and opinions, and conceit, the sense of self, I, me, mine. It's something teachers like Ajahn Kalyano would talk about all the time as one of the main causes of suffering for somebody new to a monastery. Not just monks, but lay visitors, lay practitioners, lay meditators and so on, who would come and stay in a monastery. Suddenly you're having to do things, in unison maybe, or in step with other people, and you don't always get to choose yourself exactly what you're doing and when, which is different maybe from the lay life that we're used to, where we tend to follow our own desires and wishes and routines much more. So in a monastery, it's, in the long run, this is a good phenomena, seeing your sense of self or conceit and views come up when you have to follow a monastic routine, discipline, schedule, and so on, because then you get to see what you take as self more clearly. Those views and opinions and ideas of things that you identify with as you, who you are, sometimes they're revealed to you in ways that you didn't expect. So it could be something as simple as you want to have some food in the evening, but we don't. In a monastery, you don't eat after 12 afternoon. All the food is cleared away and the kitchen is shut up. So you want to eat in the evening, but you can't. And so your sense of self comes up in the form of a desire, maybe, for a snack or something, because a lot of us like to snack in the lay life. And then suddenly you can't do that. So what do? Well, you have to sit there with your desire and then observe it, maybe restrain it, ideally see it as impermanent, as not self, and just let it go, let it fade and not follow it. Occasionally people do follow it, even in a monastery, and people, their desires can be so strong. So it could be to eat, to sleep, to talk, to do something or other that's not quite in line with the routine or the place. And that's when you see your sense of self come up strongest. This is why monasteries in particular, but the training in the Buddhist path as a whole as well is quite useful for us to get to see where the cause of suffering is. Because it's really that attachment to the sense of self, views and opinions that we identify with as self. When that comes up and it's maybe challenged, or we're not getting exactly what we want or how we like, then we see these reactions that come up in our mind. And we have this way of saying, we say, this is the sense of self. So you disapprove of some activity in the monastery that you're made to do, or that everyone is doing, or some rule that you have to follow, and you see your own views and opinions come up. But because it's in a more peaceful, controlled environment, maybe that gives you the chance to see and then let go, or at least understand if you're feeling stress, suffering, where it's coming from. And maybe you can actually see how you're holding on or clinging to a certain thought or reacting to something in a certain way. So if you ask anyone who's lived in a Buddhist monastery, they'll usually have experiences of this. Being asked to do something, some task, some activity they didn't want to do, or and then some reaction comes up. I remember when I was a junior monk, I was once assigned a job to clean the hall, the meditation hall. And in Thailand that usually means sweeping, sometimes mopping as well, but usually sweeping with a soft broom, sweeping the dust, and then maybe mopping after that. It's a very straightforward job and can be quite enjoyable even sometimes. But then depends on what your mood is and how you feel. Sometimes you given assigned a job that you don't want to do. I remember one time I was assigned the job to clean the hall, and I was sweeping it from end to end. It was quite a big hall. I tried to be mindful, do the job as best as I could, clean the floor, get everything sorted, put away the broom, and then I was ready to go off. And just as I was leaving the hall, another monk who was a little bit more senior to me, been there a bit longer, more experienced, came up and said, "The hall needs sweeping." And I said, "Oh, I just swept it." But that monk hadn't seen me, so he said, "Oh, you can sweep it again." And I said, "But I just swept it." And he said, "Oh, no, it needs to be swept, and I didn't see anyone sweep it, so you're going to have to do it." So I protested a little bit, and then he said, "It doesn't matter if you sweep it again, it's still good. You just practice mindfulness of sweeping and the hall gets even cleaner than before." I couldn't argue with his logic, so I went away and I swept the whole floor again. And at first I was a little bit annoyed. Why sweep a floor again? But then thinking about it, establishing some awareness and looking at my own reaction and looking what was going on in that situation, I thought, well, there really is nothing lost just to sweep again. It's good exercise, and maybe it'll make the hall a bit cleaner than it was before. and I'm just practicing mindfulness. When you're mindful, if you take a bit longer to do a job than you planned, or you sweep a floor that you've already swept once and just sweep it again, when you're mindful, you can do that. Because mindfulness is this quality of just knowing without judging too much or making too much out of your experience. So even if you're having to sweep a floor for a second time, you might say, oh, that does sound like a waste of time. But in the doing of it, if you're mindful and you're just going through a routine of a cleaning job that you've already done once, but you're just doing it again, you don't have to get caught into your reaction of maybe annoyance or dissatisfaction. Why am I having to do this job all over again? The normal grumbling states of mind that might come up. You can just practice mindfulness, go back to your sweeping routine, try and get the job done well, properly, without judging yourself or the one who made you do the second round of sweeping or whatever. That may be your goal. It's just to learn to bring up the mindfulness in that situation, even though it may be frustrating or annoying. So for myself, I learned something quite important that day, how you can apply mindfulness to a situation or a task or some activity that you're involved with that on the outside might look like frustrating or annoying, like sweeping a floor for a second time round. But then also reflecting, well, when you're mindful, it really doesn't matter whether you're doing it for the first time, the second time, or even the third time. I've never had to sweep a floor for a third time, so I don't know exactly what it would feel like, but I can imagine. But I know that if I was mindful in that situation, in the end it's just another activity, moving the arms, sweeping dust along a floor. For a third time would be okay. Life is actually full of all kinds of repetitive routines, not just monastic life, but if you go to work every day, maybe your workplace is one place, so you will travel there every day, travel home after work. At your workplace, you may be engaged in certain activities that are quite repetitive. Part of life is like that, repeating things over and over again. It doesn't always sound the most romantic or attractive kind of activity to repeat something you've done before, but if you're mindful, that sense of self maybe fades out, doesn't it? And you can even repeat something mindfully without getting frustrated, annoyed, bored, without seeking anything more than just doing that activity, even if it's something repetitive. And we will learn that from the breathing meditation, don't we? When we're focusing our mindfulness on the breath, knowing the in-breath, the out-breath, you end up practicing mindfulness of breathing and being aware of hundreds, if not thousands, of in and out breaths. And most breaths are much the same from one breath to another. There may be very minute differences that you notice, but generally not much. Why is it you can sit and watch the breath go in and go out? Sure, you may sometimes get bored or you have different moods arise, but many people learn to watch the breath every day or almost every day of their life. And a lot of that activity is repetitive. Why can they do that? Well, because your mind, you might say, is going to a higher level, a higher place, or a place of more detachment or separation from experience, where you're just knowing your experience but without getting caught into the reactions, the judgments, this sense of self or ditthi-mana. As you meditate, you notice how that sense of self keeps re-emerging, particularly when mindfulness drops. There you are watching the breath. When you're mindful of the in and out breath, the sense of self subsides and you can feel quite cool, quite calm. But as you drop or lose your mindfulness, then the sense of self re-emerges, doesn't it? And you start reacting to things with pleasure or displeasure, remembering things, fantasizing, imagining. And for a while this sense of self re-emerges, and then perhaps later on you re-establish mindfulness, come back to the breath, and the sense of self goes dormant or quiet for a while. And most meditators have this dynamic quite regularly. They have periods of mindfulness, whether they're sitting or walking meditation or occasionally in other activities, and then they lose it again and the mind is straying off into thoughts, daydreams, fantasies and so on. And that's one of the biggest challenges of meditation, is you're dealing with the loss of mindfulness. When you are mindful, it's almost like more automatic. What you have to do is maintain that awareness on your object and of your body and mind, and think what you're thinking and feeling in the present moment. When you're mindful, that becomes more automatic, more natural to do. But perhaps the hard part is when we lose the mindfulness again and go into the imagination and daydreaming. And what we know maybe from your own experience, but also from teachers and also from science, we spend an awful lot of time being not mindful, going into the dream state, going into habitual reactions to things, where we're not fully mindful of what's actually going on in our experience. One of the biggest challenges of training this mind is kind of waking it up to the truth and to the present moment, cutting through some of the daydreams, the mental proliferation. And monastic training can often do that, because you have a routine to follow. That in itself can help. Makes you maybe get up at a time that you would rather just sleep, or stay up at a time when you would rather sleep, or come to a meditation meeting when you would rather be fantasizing or dreaming, or even in a meditation session, you're still working with your own mind that wants to drift away or react to things all the time. But the monastery, one of the ways it works, monastic training, monastic lifestyle, is it kind of wakes you up to things. Most monks will have had that experience, walking along a pathway, thinking they're being mindful of their stepping and moving, and then realizing when they encounter something unexpected, like an animal or a snake, or a branch of a tree falls down nearby or something, suddenly to wake up realizing that you weren't actually that mindful. The mind was lost in its thoughts. But living in a forest monastery, often things do happen to wake us up and bring us back to the present moment, because you're living close to nature. You have to be more mindful walking along a path so you don't trip over. Living in a kuti with a limited source of, say, electricity or light. If you light a candle or turn a lantern on, it makes you mindful in a way, because you have to be careful how you move around in the semi-darkness and so on. And monastic living is like this. Many aspects of it are making you mindful. It works just the same in the lay life, except for there's perhaps more things to trip us up. You can trip over the cat. Somebody was saying they tripped over a baby lamb recently, which unfortunately caused them an injury. We do trip over pets, so we have pets at home. But the lay life is perhaps slightly different things that wake us up. But the dynamic and the process is much the same. You go through your day, a lot of the day we're kind of daydreaming and kind of drifting through. But there's these small moments where we start to wake up. And you might say the practice of the Buddhist path is designed partly to wake us up a bit quicker. So it's not just having to wait until you trip over the dog or bump into some furniture or something before you wake up from your dream state or your fantasies. But actually learning to be mindful in daily life is a big part of the practice. Being vigilant, and taking care. One thing that helps us to be more mindful is what we talk about. How helpful is our speech for bringing us back to the Dhamma. The Buddha encouraged practitioners to speak in ways that are promoting the Dhamma, bringing people to be more mindful and pay attention, and also to cultivate the themes of the Dhamma through speech. So speech that encourages people to recognize their desires and let go of some of the worst or more excessive desires, especially desires based around anger or fear. Speech that helps to calm someone down when they're stressed, or encouraging other people to let go of their anger. If they're sort of angry with someone, maybe encouraging them to forgive, to let go so that they calm down. Speech that encourages people to be sober when they're becoming intoxicated. Speech that encourages people to be more modest or content when they're displaying greed. So our speech and the kind of things we talk about, the subject matter for our speech, is part of the Dhamma practice, and we can help each other to be more mindful in that way. It's one of the benefits of living or spending time with Dhamma friends is they often say things that bring us back to the Dhamma when we've forgotten the Dhamma, when we're unmindful, when we're getting lost in our moods, worrying, desiring, getting caught into aversion for things. Then sometimes a good Dhamma friend will bring you back to the present moment, help you to find a way to let go and bring back the mindfulness and maybe some wisdom in that situation. So how we speak to each other is part of our Dhamma practice. Even when we're on our own, how we speak to ourselves. Because part of this problem of dealing with the mind that gets caught into daydreams, fantasies, is what are you actually saying to yourself in those fantasies? Because when we're not mindful, we often get caught up into our moods of greed and aversion, desire and fear and anxiety, and the mental chatter reflects that. And our mental chatter, when we're not very mindful, is often not that skillful. So sometimes we have to question the mental chatter and redirect it in a better way. Talk to ourselves in a way that maybe improves our state of mind in a certain situation at a certain time. And to develop that as a skill, something that you can keep using over and over as a way to just calm the mind down, bring it back to the present moment. We say to let go of that sense of self that may be forming around a certain situation. Giving yourself the right instructions. And you learn that in meditation. Often we spend a lot of time in our meditation just drifting off. The mind forgets the technique of the meditation, the breath, loses awareness of the present moment. It just gets lost in daydreams and thoughts. Developing that technique of bringing your own mind back to the present moment, reminding yourself, what are you doing? What am I doing right now? What's going on here? The Buddha said if you have this problem, your mind is always drifting off, one of the best ways to cut through that is practicing mindfulness of the body. So get into the good habit of, the skillful habit of directing your awareness, your attention back to the body. So that could involve the way you talk to yourself as well, just giving yourself the instruction, where is my mind right now? Am I with the body? Am I mindful of the body? Am I with the breathing? Am I aware of the posture? What am I doing at this moment in time? You can develop your own simple thoughts, processes and skillful habits of mind to help you bring up mindfulness in the course of your day, or even just in the course of one meditation session. Sometimes we do physical actions to bring up mindfulness. So a really good one is you open your eyes when you're drifting, when you're falling asleep or daydreaming. Just open your eyes, and that breaks the habit of the mind at that moment. So reminding yourself, just open the eyes if you're getting lost in a stream of thought. Or another good one is just holding your breath. If you become so lost that you can't find your breath anymore, and you're just thinking and thinking and thinking, on and on it goes, particularly when you're worried, anxious, just hold your breath. It brings the mind back to the present moment very quickly. And you can't help but notice those thoughts that you've been lost in are totally impermanent. They're temporary train of thought or a mood that quickly subsides when you hold your breath and come back to the present moment. These are just examples of how to re-establish mindfulness, through what we call wise reflection, actually speaking to yourself in a skillful way, speaking to others in a skillful way to promote the Dhamma, speaking to yourself, or just using techniques to bring your attention back to the present moment. And having the patience, the willingness to keep doing that, because we know that our mind is so stubborn. It just loves to get caught up into trains of thought. And the hardest ones are when the sense of self comes up strongest, right? When we have the strongest emotions, such as strong desire for something, strong anger, fear, strong worry or anxiety. We all have this experience where our emotions come up really strongly and take the mind away from the present moment, and the mind starts rushing and maybe even feels quite uncontrollable for a while. But recognizing that, getting to know your own state of mind through practicing mindfulness regularly, you get to know your own character better. You know when your anger or your fear or your desire is triggered, what sort of situations trigger it. And you start observing yourself more closely, and maybe before you've fallen into the anger, you're observing the initial stages of feeling physically tired or stressed, certain thought patterns coming up, your mind focusing on certain issues or problems that will bring you anger. You're remembering things that have happened before that made you angry before, and then just keep on holding on to them, remembering them. You know that will keep making you angry again, or make you sad or depressed, whatever. Getting to know yourself and what triggers certain strong emotions that do take over the mind. And then maybe having strategies, plans in place, what to do when you notice that happening. What can you do to calm yourself down? What can you do to change the subject matter of your mind? A bit like when you're watching TV and you change the channel. So you completely move on to something else and let go of that emotion that was forming. If it's not yet very strong in your mind, how can you let it go quickly? And maybe learning to move away, avert your gaze, change your gaze from something that stirs up a strong emotion, or move away from a situation, physically move away. There's so many different strategies we can use, but thinking this through, planning this is one of the things you learn from meditation. You learn where your weaknesses are, your habits. You start to see your habits. And then you devise some methods how to deal with them. Sometimes people use particular phrases as part of that inner conversation, training the mental conversation to be helpful to you. So using certain phrases, it could be something as simple as be at peace, or let it be, or let go, or it's temporary. Simple phrases that help you to see the impermanence of a certain mood that's coming up, or a train of thought that you know is likely to take you over, but catching it before it takes you over so that you can interrupt the flow of that emotion. Maybe bring up more self-control, more mindfulness at that time. Or sometimes we just have to use the word like be patient is another one. Be patient with this, be patient. Particularly if it's a strong emotion that you can't just cut off just like that. It's already taken over your mind. You don't want it there, you can see the suffering of it. But how can you deal with it? Or you teach yourself to be patient and then watch. And watch how long will it last. Any particular mood, negative moods of suffering, stress, worry, fear, anger, you know from your past experience that they are temporary. So when they come up again, you just establish enough awareness to say, this is temporary, I'll be patient with this, and then watch. Ask yourself, how long before it changes? Because every mood, every train of thought changes. You really don't have one single thought in mind all day long. If you can be aware when you notice that a mood has changed, a mood that was previously bothering you and you felt like you couldn't let it go before, when you finally observe that it's gone from your mind, to be aware at that moment and say, it's past, it's changed. What was there before is not there now. And you can be absolutely sure that it's impermanent, it's not self. And the sense of self that formed around that particular feeling and train of thought is now gone. You may say it's replaced by a better sense of self. You may still have a sense of self coming up, but it's now a different sense of self, and maybe a better one if you're not feeling so stressed. But what you can say is it's temporary. That mood, that thought, that emotion and feeling, physical or mental, was temporary, and it's subject to change. And each time you do that, a little bit of that wisdom sticks in your mind. And so you get used to knowing your own physical and mental experience, knowing your own body and mind the way it is, that it's temporary. It's what we say, it's a conditioned thing. This mind is conditioned by the different thoughts and memories that come into it, and they take away our mindfulness, first of all, and then we get caught into these different moods. If we don't make any effort, they tend to take over the mind and come up more often, more strongly. But if we make the effort to establish mindfulness and establish some understanding, wise reflection, that also is conditioning our mind, but in a good way. And we're reducing the power of those moods of attachment, pleasure and pain and worry and fear and all the different things that cause us suffering. We're gradually undermining their power to take over the mind, and the mind is kind of waking up to the truth more and more. Maybe a slow, laborious progress, but it's possible. And little by little you can establish some wisdom. And in Buddhism, wisdom is that understanding that helps free your mind from suffering. Maybe to see a certain feeling or emotion is impermanent, and what is impermanent is not self. And wisdom stays. If you've seen that once, a little bit of that understanding stays in your mind and is ready to help you next time that you perhaps notice you're getting caught into suffering. Ajahn Chah used to say, if you keep contemplating in this way, establishing mindfulness, putting up with your own stubborn mind that loves to manufacture all kinds of distractions, stress, suffering, this sense of self, putting up with it and keep observing along, following along, watching how things arise, pass away. Eventually you get to a point where it becomes quite enjoyable to do this. You've done it enough to the point where you know every mood, every thought, every sense impression, every memory is impermanent. And you can keep collecting them up. And he used to say, like collecting fruit and putting it in a basket. Like when you collect fruit from a tree. Just keep collecting things up. And it becomes quite enjoyable. Even the more unpleasant, unsavory, unskillful kind of thoughts that sometimes come up. Actually collecting them up with awareness, understanding that, they're just temporary, they're not really me, they're not really a solid self. When you put them in the basket of impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self, in these terms, anicca, dukkha, anatta, and it becomes quite enjoyable to do that. Because you realize you're actually learning about yourself more deeply and you're getting down to maybe a deeper level of your own mind. And we have no choice. If we want to train this mind, we've got to learn to look at it, watch it and observe it. It's not always easy because we're not just seeing good things, we're also seeing the not so good stuff. And sometimes we don't really want to see it, or we don't feel strong enough to see it. We don't feel calm enough to see it. But we have to keep looking, keep learning. And little by little you're kind of going to slightly deeper states of consciousness. You notice when mindfulness is more continuous, there comes with that a certain relaxed awareness, sense of ease, and that allows you to go a little bit more deeply into your own mental experience and recognize habit patterns, cravings, attachments that you may have just glimpsed at before, but maybe now you can see more clearly if mindfulness is strong, and actually start recognizing them for what they are. They're just habits of mind, mental activity that is not self, nothing that you have to cling on to. And doing that little by little, and you can change habits of mind and find inner states of inner peace, maybe that you never found before. When you recognize something as impermanent and put it down, let it go, your mind tends to relax more, becomes more content, more happy in that situation or at that moment. So practicing meditation, mindfulness, and then wise reflection. Something that's very much an ongoing practice you're developing every day, not just in meditation, but in different activities. You're learning to turn attention backwards in different situations, back to yourself, back to your own mind, your own thoughts, your own feelings in different situations. And although it can be a very frustrating thing, it's also very rewarding. And you're learning perhaps the best lessons that you can learn as a human being. You're learning how to let go of the causes of suffering from your own mind. So maybe for tonight I'll just leave you with those reflections, and afterwards, if anyone has any questions, we'll do our best to answer them.